Hi everybody, so today I'm going to show you the recipe I use for making pulled pork. Now I do sometimes do it in the slow cooker, but today I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way and let it cook in the oven all day. The weather has cooled off considerably this morning, so I don't mind having the oven on all day, and it's on a really low temperature. It's 140 degrees Celsius. I think that's about 280, something like that, or if you've got a Fahrenheit oven. So it's a really low temperature, and it's going to cook for about 8 hours. But I'm going to show you the process I go through to make our pulled pork. So if you wanted to use a similar recipe, once the pork's cooked, there's so many things you can do with it. I'm going to make a new recipe with it this evening, which I'll show in our normal Meals of the Week video. But first of all, I make a sauce. So make my own barbecue sauce, which is really, really simple to make. So in here I've got 2 tablespoons of light brown sugar. I've got 1 tablespoon of smoked paprika. I'm going to use a pinch of cayenne pepper. And then I'm going to use a cup and a quarter of each of tomato ketchup and cider vinegar, apple cider vinegar. So cider vinegar is the best vinegar to use for barbecue sauce because it's got a bit of a sweet undertone to it. But essentially for any homemade barbecue sauce, real shortcut is to use ketchup as one of the bases because it has some of those seasonings already in. You can do it completely from scratch using some tomato like passata. But I do take a slight shortcut of using ketchup as a starting point and then adding in the other flavours. So I'm just going to mix those all up. Okay, so the sauce has all mixed together. You can see it's a nice pouring sort of consistency. Lots of different ways of making barbecue sauce, lots of different profiles. Most of them have a vinegar base and then something to sweeten it up. So if you search online, you'll find all kinds of recipes for barbecue sauce, but that's my preferred one. In this little pot I've got, so I think the best barbecue comes from having a dry rub on the meat and then putting some sauce on as well, so you get the combination of two. So in here I've got a teaspoon of cumin, some chopped fresh thyme, and you could use dried thyme, about a teaspoon if you don't have fresh, some sea salt, and I've only put less than a teaspoon in. We don't as a family like anything too salty, but if you like that saltiness in your food then add a bit more. A teaspoon of garlic granules, 4 tablespoons of brown sugar, 2 tablespoons of the smoked paprika, and a little sprinkle of cinnamon, probably about half a teaspoon in there. So the pork is about 1 kilogram of pork shoulder, which in the US is called pork butt. Here in the UK, when you buy it, it's typically going to have the layer of fat that you turn into crackling if you're going to roast it. I've cut that all off because obviously I want the flavours to get into the pork and not just sit on top of the skin. In the US, you typically don't buy it with the skin on. If you buy from a butcher, they will always cut the skin off for you if you ask them to, or you can just buy one at the grocery store as I did. But if you're going to do that and you want about 1 kilo of pork, then you need to buy about 1.5 kilos because the skin is quite a heavy, weighty piece. So I've cut the skin off. It's left this, it was a rolled joint, so it had the strings all around it, so I've taken those all off to spread it out a bit. And what I'm going to do is just put this dry rub all over the pork. So I'm just going to massage it into the meat, and then I will turn the pork over and put some, you can see there where it's unrolled, because the bone was taken out of the shoulder to make it a boneless piece of meat. Yeah, just put as much of that flavour. That flavour is going to cook for, as I said, about 8 hours. I've put foil in the tin because, as you can see, there is brown sugar in this, and there's brown sugar on the sauce as well. So that will stick to your pan. So the best thing is to line your pan with some foil or greaseproof or something like that. But plenty of the rub all over your piece of pork. And then with your sauce, you want to use just about half of it and just spoon it over. So you don't want it to rub off the dry mixture that you've just put on, but you just want to spoon it over. And that's going to add a nice crispiness to the outside of the pork, but also it's going to help put that flavour deep into the pork that you've just rubbed all over. So the other half I'm going to keep. I'm going to combine that with the pork once I pull it, when it's all cooked. So that's now going to go in the oven, as I said, really low temperature, 140°C, which is about 280 Fahrenheit, and it's going to stay in there for about 8 hours. You could do this in a slow cooker, the difference being you wouldn't get those crispy edges that you will get with it being in the oven. So once it's been in the oven all day, we'll come back, show you how we're going to pull it, and then I'll let you know what we're going to do with it for this evening's tea. Okay, so the one thing I forgot to do when the pork was cooked was show you the pulling part, but essentially once it's cooked through, you just get 2 forks and just start shredding the pork. That's why it's called pulling, because you're pulling it apart. And this is what you end up with. Now you see on mine there's some real crispy bits on the pork. That's because I did it in the oven and it has sugar content in it, and so it does get crispy even on a really low temperature. If you don't want that, so if I'm using it for like sandwiches where I want it to be just really soft, for pulled pork in bread rolls, then I do it in the slow cooker. That way you don't get the crispy bits. If you do it in the oven, you will get some crispy edges to it. So that's just really a choice about how you like your pulled pork. Now, if I were going to serve this again just as pulled pork with some sides like baked potatoes and salad or something like that, I would have taken it out just a bit earlier before it got too crispy. But I'm actually using this today in a casserole, which I'll tell you about in just a moment. But what I've done with the other half of the barbecue sauce that I didn't use this morning when I basted the pork when it went in the oven, I just added a tiny bit of butter to it, melted that through and heated it up, and then I've just poured that over the top of the pork. Now, the fun part with today's menu is that I'm going to add on top of that some homemade delicious macaroni cheese. So this is really soft and gooey, so that's why I'm not too worried about the crispy bits being in the casserole. Again, if I was serving it just as pulled pork, I would put it out on the plate to let people pick if they want the inside softer bits or the outside crispy bits. Like Tony likes the crispy parts, Caleb likes the soft parts. I'm really not bothered either way. So this is a mac and cheese I made with, boiled up some macaroni. Then I used 50 grams each of butter and plain flour. Melted that together in the pan. Added in 3.5 cups, so that's what, 1.75 pints of whole milk. And just started working it together until it went smooth. Then I added in a pinch of pepper, a good handful each of cheddar, shredded mozzarella and parmesan to give it the cheesiness. Now I'm going to, there's a huge pot of this here, as you can see. I'm going to use some of it to top that. I'm then going to sprinkle breadcrumbs over the top of that, a little bit more cheese, and then I'm going to bake it in the oven for about 20 minutes just to let the cheese on the top melt and the breadcrumbs go crispy. So everything is cooked. You could just have it like this, but I want to just let the flavours develop a little bit more. So I will show you that when it's finished, but that's essentially the basic pulled pork recipe we use for everything that we use pulled pork for. So a dry rub, a wet mop, as they call it in some parts of the southern US, so with wet sauce. And then you just bring the two things together at the end, the additional sauce and your pulled pork, and then use it for whatever. Great in sandwiches, great as just a dish, side dish with potato salad, or with barbecue beans and baked potatoes, something like that. It makes a great dish. But then you can also use pulled pork for tacos. You can use it in a casserole like this one with mac and cheese on the top. You could almost use it as a base and then put like mashed potatoes on the top and make like a shepherd's pie with pulled pork. The options are endless with it. So I'm just going to put the rest of this together so that we can get on with dinner for this evening, and I will just come back and show you how the finished casserole looks. And so there's the finished product. You can see that the pulled pork is on the bottom and the mac and cheese on the top, and then if I just go over here, you can see just kind of all melds together when you put it out on the plate. So that's the recipe for pulled pork with macaroni cheese topping, or pulled pork and macaroni cheese pie, as we sometimes call it. If you like those kind of American style flavours, we do hope you'll give this one a try.